Hey guys, so when I was a Protestant evangelical back in the day, I was very anti-Catholic, uh, but I had a respect for Pope Saint John Paul II because I knew I was always politically in tune with what was going on in the world, and I knew it was Pope Saint John Paul II, Ronald Reagan, and Margaret Thatcher who defeated the Soviet Union. Something people said would be impossible. When Reagan came to office and his Secretary of Defense said, "Mr. President, what's your plan to contain the Soviet Union?" He said, "My plan is to defeat the Soviet Union." And the Secretary of Defense, a longtime political guy, said, "Never heard any president say that. Like, no one thought it would be possible to defeat him." But thanks to Pope St. John Paul II, we defeated the Soviet Union and did more for religious freedom throughout the world. I think that alone, he should be made a saint. Even then I was like, wow, this is amazing. I mean, no one growing up, we would have never thought this was possible. In fact, even Vladimir Putin, who was a KGB agent at the time, said this was devastating. This was the worst loss he's seen. And you see, he's spending the rest of his life trying to put it together, but he won't put it back together. Trust me. But still, I was anti-Catholic. So I was so naive. I would say in my pride, well, I agree with him politically, but theologically he's lost. I got to pray for the Pope's conversion. God, please forgive me for that. But because I really didn't know, what the Catholic Church taught. I didn't like the Catholic Church, or I didn't like the Catholic Church because of what I thought it taught. And I didn't like the Pope's theology because of what I thought he thought. And then once I understood his theology and understood what the church teaches, of course, I became Catholic. And you guys all know my story. But I never really knew much about JP2, as he's known. But lately I've been reading a lot about him, and I gotta tell you, I'm falling in love with this saint. I really am. And I did one video about his miracles the other day, and I had another video planned for the next day, but I kind of got sidetracked. But I do have another video planned, and I think I'm gonna have more because what a great example for every Christian alive today, and especially as for us Catholic Christians. But as I'm studying, I'm seeing, number one, I'm noticing his holiness. He's so holy. He was such a holy man when he walked the earth. But yet, he was even more humble. His humility is just breathtaking, very humble. And another thing, you could be humble and holy and not very nice. I mean, like, nice is kind of like a personality trait. I mean, we all got to be nice and kind and love our neighbor, but some people are just nice. And that's why I see just a nice, approachable man, just very nice. And I was like, could anybody have a bad thing to say about this man? So I said, you know what? I wonder if Marshall bashes this Pope, the saint, like he bashes Francis. And lo and behold, he does. And I was like, whoa. And not only does he bash him, he uses the same tactics, like almost identical. And I'll show you a couple in a minute, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So I find one video where he's like, why did Pope Francis canonize Saint Pope Paul VI and Saint Pope John Paul II? I always get confused if I should put Pope before Saint or Saint before Pope. If you know that, please let me know in the comments. I know they're saints and I know they're popes. And I thank God for both of these men. But according to Taylor Marshall, the reason Francis, as he refers to the Holy Father, Francis did it. This is what he says. Francis, and when he refers to him as saints, he's like saints, like Saint Pope John Paul II, saint. And like he says it sarcastically, like he doesn't think they're saints, but he's smart enough not to say that what he really believes. He's very ambiguous, and it's one of the tactics of the left he uses. If you ever heard of Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radical, he says, accuse the person, your opponent, of what you are. Like project, it was what they call it in politics. If you're ambiguous, you project that your opponent is ambiguous. So it's a tactic of the left that he uses, and he uses other ones. But not saying he's a lefty. I'm just saying he uses their tactics. But anyway, so he says the reason, he knows the reason. He's the judge of the Pope. Remember that. He could tell you why Pope Francis does what he does. He said the reason wasn't because of communism, wasn't because of Poland. It was because Francis wanted to canonize Vatican II. Francis wanted to canonize the Novus Order. And I was like, I'm thinking, okay, yeah. See, there's something very interesting. I did a little research on, Saint Pope Paul VI as well. And very interesting. Listen to this. This is very interesting. When Marcel Lefebvre started his schism, Pope St. Paul VI wrote him a letter and said, you're acting like an anti-pope. If I were to listen to you, I would just give my pope and give it to you. and if I'm not mistaken, he suspended his faculties for a time, like saying, okay, you can't do this. You just, you're being very rebellious, accused him of being rebellious. Basically, chewed him out, as he should have. I actually think he was kind of kind. So they didn't have a good relationship. And then, of course, everybody knows that Saint Pope John Paul II excommunicated Marcel Lefebvre. Now, I've heard Marshall on more than one occasion say he believes Marcel Lefebvre is a saint. So he insinuates that Pope John Paul II and Pope Paul VI aren't saints. They're saints not because anything they did that was wonderful and saintly, but because Francis used them, because he wanted to canonize Vatican II and the Novus Order. So I thought that was interesting. Now, if you're not familiar with Marcel Lefebvre, he's an excommunicated Catholic, just like Martin Luther was an excommunicated Catholic. And just like shortly after Martin Luther was excommunicated and passed away, there were some Catholics that believed Luther was right and thought Luther was a saint. And there's some Catholics today, believe it or not, that think Marcel Lefebvre was right and that he's a saint. You have a whole society, Saint SSPX, that believe this. And because they believe this, even though Marcel Lefebvre signed every single document in Vatican II, signed every single document, was all for Vatican II, and there's some reports that he actually said a new mass, and of course SPX says, no, he didn't, but that doesn't even matter, but whether he did or he didn't. It was shortly after that he came out and said, new mass is evil, don't go to it. And now the SPX tells people, like Kennedy Hall is a member, and he straight up tells people, commit a mortal sin. Like, he doesn't say it's a mortal sin. He says, if your only option is to go to a Novus Order Mass, the Mass that 90% of Catholics go to, the Mass that most of us can only go to, like, I would love to try traditional Latin Mass. I hear they're beautiful. I hear my friends tell me that know me, said, man, you would love it, Rob. And I'm sure I would. But I don't have one close by. I'd have to drive a couple hours. And the Catechism teaches us that we're supposed to serve our local community in the local Mass. So if I would go, just to check it out. But to be involved, I have to be in the Mass that my bishop puts closest to me if I want to be a faithful Catholic. But that's kind of going off track. But Kennedy Hall and every SSPX will tell you, if you can only get to a Novus Order, don't go. Stay home. Just stay home. You're better off staying home. In fact, in one of his videos, and the name was called I'd Rather Die Than Go to a Novus Order Mass, but then he changed the name, but the video's still up. He changed the name, but in the video, he still said he'd rather die than go eat the body and blood and full divinity of Jesus Christ. I think maybe these are that percentage of Catholics that don't believe the Eucharist is the full body, blood, and Jesus Christ, because Why would you rather die than eat the full body blood of Jesus Christ? Doesn't make sense. But this is how much they hate the new Mass. So now Taylor Marshall is an SSPX, but he discourages. He won't say don't go. He, like I said, he's very, at least Kennedy Hall tells you what he believes. This guy is he's like a politician, very slithery, where he'll just bash the new Mass so much that all his respondents will say, yeah, I'll drive 2 hours to go to a Latin Mass. I'll drive 3 hours. And he's like, yeah, I love that. So he attacks Pope St. Paul VI, Pope John Paul II, and then his successor, Benedict, Pope Benedict. He says in one of his videos, the 4 reasons why Benedict, like he knows everything, this guy. The 4 reasons Benedict resigned is, and he goes down like a detective, putting the pieces together, that it was all about the financial crisis. And he couldn't take the pressure, so he resigned. So he calls Benedict a liar. He doesn't come out and say Benedict's a liar, but Benedict said he couldn't do it no more. He wasn't physically able. And then then his exact words, when I seen Pope Francis with the people, I knew I did the right thing. Pope Francis is the man for the job today. And him and Pope Francis always talk highly of each other. They pray together. They met together. They always talked highly. You can never find a negative thing Pope Francis said about Pope Benedict or Pope Benedict said about Pope Francis. Yet, Marshall goes on Glenn Beck's YouTube channel, syndicated radio show. Now, Glenn Beck is a Mormon. He talks about his Mormon faith. He tries to be a devout Mormon, but like all of us in our faith, none of us are perfect. But he tries, and he believes the Mormon teachings. He said he accepts Mormon teaching. And one of the Mormon teachings is the Pope is the Antichrist. So he goes on the show, and Glenn Beck says to him, well, I hear there's a demonic evil in the Vatican. And it seems like Benedict thought it was Francis. And Marshall agrees with him. Again, that's a lie. Benedict always talked highly of Pope Francis, and vice versa. And in the conversation with Black, he insinuates that Francis was scared, Pope Benedict was scared for his life. So not only does he call him a liar, calls him a coward, but he says it in a roundabout way. So he can't be quoted as, Taylor Marshall called Benedict a coward. Even though with Francis, now that, he got, the frog in the cool water, warm and hot, now he comes straight out and says, Francis is a heretic, his exact words, And then on top of that, he's always insinuating that Francis might not be the legitimate Pope. And he always has people on that don't believe that. And he's like, yeah, you make a good point. And again, he won't come across like there's some sedevacantists that are publicly sedevacantists. They will say they're a sedevacantists. They believe the seat is empty. Patrick Coffin is one. They believe the seat is empty. There's no Pope. But this is a grave, grave mortal sin, Just like not accepting an ecumenical council like SSPX, it's a grave mortal sin. So Marshall's not going to commit to saying that, but he leads all his followers to believe this, so much that on his Twitter poll, he asked, why would you even ask this question? Who thinks Pope Francis is a legitimate, valid Pope? And more than half of his followers said they don't think he is. More than half. So instead of Marshall seeing this as a problem and correcting them, he leaves it out. And true sedevacantists, there's different, strands. Patrick Coffin believed Pope Benedict was a true Pope. He was what they called a Benevacantist, but then when he died, he became a Sedevacantist because the word in Latin means empty. The seat is empty. But most seeds, short for Sedevacantists, believe, like Marshall and SSPX, that Vatican II was so bad there were no legitimate popes after. That's why the logical conclusion of the SSPV. They broke off from the SSPX because they're like, well, these councils weren't legit, so no pope could be legit. So the difference between the SSPV and the SSPX is SSPX believes the pope is a valid pope, even though most of them think he's a bad pope. The SSPV say, no, there's been no pope after Vatican II. Now, it's just kind of funny that Marshall bashes every single pope after Vatican II, and he bashes Vatican II. So maybe the reason he bashes Pope John Paul II is because he didn't even think he was pope. Never mind a saint. Like he said, Saint John Paul II. And now I told you I was going to tell you his line of attack on Pope St. John Paul II is the same as his line of attack on Pope Francis. Remember when Pope Francis invited the Catholics from the Amazon to come up and to share their culture and heritage, and this one poor Amazon woman had carved a statue, and she says to the Pope, "This is Our Lady of the Amazon." And right away, Marshall said, "That's Pachamama. This was a pagan ritual." And we find out through professors of history that they can explain everything they want. It was very Catholic, but very cultural. So you had a lot of Amazon folk songs and stuff, and there was no pagan worship. But even to this day, Marshall still brings up Pachamama like the Pope was worshiping an idol. Even though he was proven, I think Michael Lawton was the first one that did a video, and he shows you the video side by side to prove this. And Jay Dyer put the video up. I think it was Jay Dyer. He's an Eastern Orthodox brother. He put the video up, proving it. And Trent Horn recently put the video up. And the video I'm talking about is when the dude threw the statue into the Tiber River. Marshall had him on his show and talked like he met him for the first time. And like, why did you do this? Blah, blah, blah. And then like a month later, the guy was on, and the guy slipped and said, "Yeah, remember you called me and I said I threw it in, and you said, yeah, I paid for the plane ticket, go get it." And then Marshall laughed and go, "Oh, I guess we should tell everybody. Yeah, we were in on this together. I met this man in Rome." The man, like, what he thought, we forgot? You know, or he knows the sycophants won't care. You know, he could shoot a guy on Fifth Avenue in the head and they'll still follow him. I don't know. But he said, "Yeah, we met and we planned this all out, and I paid for his ticket there and I paid for his ticket back, and who knows what else he paid him." But he paid him to really make this hoax popular and to get a ton of views. So the Pachamama hoax was a hoax to make the Pope of the Catholic Church look like he's worshiping an idol. This is what Jack Chick Publication, the most ridiculous anti-Catholic Protestant that ever lived, even my Protestant friends make fun of this guy, would put in his Chick tracts that the popes worship idols, the popes have pagan rituals. Took it right out of Jack Chick's playbook. I wish I had some of the old Chick things about. I would read it and you would think I was reading Marshall's diary or something. But what do they do to, what does he say about Pope St. John Paul II? There's a video with him like this. "Did Pope John Paul II kiss the Quran?" And then he says, "Yes, he did kiss it." "Did he know it was the Quran?" "I think he knew it was." And then he was generous and said, "You know, it could have been a mistake. He could have made a mistake. He could have thought, well, there's some truth in it, so I'll kiss that truth." And then he actually uses that when he says Pope Francis canonized JP2 because he wanted to canonize the new Mass. And he said, you know, John Paul II could have made a mistake on the liturgical books, just like he made a mistake kissing the Quran. Now, did he kiss the Quran? Yeah. What was the context? He was meeting with a bunch of religious leaders, some Chaldean Catholics, some Muslims, and they were all handing him gifts. He was kissing the gifts as he gave them. Very simple. Did he know it was a... Some people say maybe he didn't know. It looked like a Bible. Maybe he didn't know who was with the Chaldeans and who was with the Muslims. Some people say maybe he didn't know. And I said, well, even if he did know, it was just, you know, you see that in the Middle East a lot. When people get a gift, they kiss it. It's like to show respect. Thank you for the gift. It's not a big deal. It really isn't. But, you know, Marshall, he had to go down the rabbit hole and say, you know, in the Greek, the word worship means to kiss. And he's right, that's true. But I'm sure that's not what was going through the mind of our Holy Father, to worship the Quran. I'm sure that's not it. So, and then, just like he was, Pope Francis was involved in this, pagan worship, and he wants this one world religion. They talk about that. Oh, Assisi, 1986, Pope John Paul II got all these religions together to pray together. No, they didn't pray together. They prayed, but the Catholics prayed with the Catholics. The Muslims prayed with the Muslims. And, there was a lot of turmoil going on in the world, and he wanted to bring people together and use religion as a vehicle for peace. It was more political than spiritual. He wasn't worshiping their gods. He wasn't saying it was okay for them to worship their gods. But if you listen to those who attacked the Pope, attack all the popes after Vatican II, you would think they were involved in pagan worship. The same line of attack they had on Pope Francis. Now, people are like, why do you waste your breath with this guy? Why are you always talking about Taylor Marshall? You seem obsessed with him. Well, I'll tell you why. Because he has a huge audience, and I get a lot of emails from people that have been left out of the Catholic Church because of this man, that have become Protestants or just totally not even going to church because of this man. And his viewership or his subscriber list keeps growing. And I'm sure it's going to hit 1 million by the end of this year. It's going to keep growing. Because Jesus warned us in the last days, people are going to have itching ears. They want tickled. They're not going to listen to the truth. They want to hear what they want to hear. And right now, people are so divisive and angry. And they hate authority. Forget about submitting like St. Padre Pio. That would be miraculous to see someone doing that today. Submitting to authority when you disagree. No one wants to submit to authority. Everybody is full of rebelliousness, and St. Paul warns about this in the last days too. Men will be lovers of themselves, There'll be a party spirit, like my party, not like party, but party like Republican Party, Democrat Party. There'll be splits in the church. My party, party spirit. No, we're better. We're the TLM mass. We're superior Catholics, and for the record, they'll use that against me. I've never said a bad word about the TLM. It's a valid mass. I've never been to one, and like I said, my friends that have been to it said, Rob, you would love it. You should check it out. But they'll use that. No, I'm talking about attacking the Pope. I'm talking about attacking the Novus Ordo Mass, a valid mass, the mass that 90% of us go to. So I keep bringing him up for the same reason that Trump went after Iran, because he knew Iran was the head of the snake that supported Hamas, Hezbollah, the Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, all the terrorist groups that were causing trouble in the Middle East. And when he made Iran financially broke, there was no terrorism going on when Trump was president. Had it quiet. The Middle East was quiet. We were at peace because he knew who the head was. To me, the head of the snake is Taylor Marshall in attacking the Pope. I know other people do it, but he's the big dog. He says it, and they bend over backwards and repeat what he said. And they try and say it in their own unique way. Maybe they try and say it charitably, or maybe they try and say it more intellectually, however. But he's the guy feeding all this garbage, leading people astray. And Pope Francis isn't a young man. I hope he stays healthy like the priest we had in daily mass. I was off of work today, and it's a long story. I'm going to fill you guys in shortly on this situation. But we had a 93-year-old priest in daily mass today. And he said every mass, like we have a vigil I seen him first on Saturday night, and we have like 2 or 3 on Sunday, and then daily mass. He said every mass, and he's 93 years old, and he preaches with power, and he's radical. And I'm going to have him on the show. I can't wait. I talked to him today. He was an Army chaplain for 20 years. He was in Vietnam. He's 93 years old. And when I asked him to be on my show, he goes, yeah, anywhere I could preach the gospel. So I pray Pope Francis lasts like that. But chances are he's not. And there's going to be another Pope. And I guarantee you the way they attacked Pope Francis, the way they attacked Pope St. John Paul II, the way they attack Benedict, the way they attack Pope St. Paul VI, they're going to attack this new Pope. And they'll be like a lion, you know. The Bible says that the devil's like a roaring lion seeking whom he can devour. You know, lions wait. They wait to pounce. So maybe the first year they won't, you know, like Francis, nobody really attacked them hard. Gave it a little bit of time, and then they pounce like a roaring lion trying to devour the Pope. And so I just want to warn you guys. And like I said, his channel is going to grow because people want to hear itching ears. And, you know, I work a full-time job. So my channel probably, I'm being realistic, probably stay about what it is. But this is for those who have ears to hear. Listen, never, ever go against the church. And I'm just going to give you some truths right here from the Catechism. And if you hear anybody going against the church, run from these people. Catechism 2478. To avoid rash judgment, everyone should be careful to interpret insofar as possible his neighbor's thoughts, words, and deeds in a favorable way. So you think that was a rash judgment? You know, was that interpreting Pope St. John Paul's thoughts and deeds when he kissed the Quran? Was that charitable? I don't think so. Every good Christian ought to be more ready to give a favorable interpretation to another's statement than to condemn it. But if he cannot do so, let him ask how the other understands it. And if the latter understands it badly, let the former correct him with love. If that does not suffice, let the Christian try all suitable ways to bring the other to a correct interpretation so that they may be saved. Then the Code of Canon Law, that every Catholic, if you're faithful, you must abide by it. Canon Law 1373 says this: one who publicly either stirs up hostilities or hatred among subjects against the Apostolic See or against an ordinary on account of some act of ecclesiastical power or ministry, or incites subjects to disobey them, is to be punished by an interdict or by other just penalties. Canon Law 1373. And then Canon Law 1404. The first see is judged by only Taylor Marshall. Of course, it doesn't say that. Canon Law 1404. Simple. That's how I like things. Simple. The first see is judged by no one. So it's not our job to judge the Pope. It's our job to always give him the benefit of the doubt, to love him and pray for him. And the next Pope, you're going to see the same thing. And just remember this: God bless and stay Catholic.